Today I'm going to tell you about Ezra, a man who didn't just kill the monster who tortured him. He turned that monster into dinner, and what he did with the leftovers will make you question everything you think you know about justice. This is the story of the Butcher of Kentucky, the man who proved that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to become something even more terrifying. So ask yourself this: how far would you go if someone spent years systematically destroying your soul? Because what Ezra did will haunt your nightmares forever. Let me paint you a picture of absolute evil walking on two legs. His name was Josiah Creed, and he wasn't just an overseer, he was a predator who had found the perfect hunting ground. The year was 1851, Hartwell Plantation in Kentucky. This wasn't your typical plantation horror story. Oh, this was something darker, something that would make the devil himself take notes. Creed had a game he played every Sunday after the forced prayer service. He called it Sunday Discipline. But this wasn't just about punishment. This was about psychological warfare that would break Navy SEAL. Here's how his twisted game worked. He'd pick someone at random. Then he'd give them a choice that no human being should ever have to make. Take 20 lashes yourself, or watch someone you love get 40. Can you imagine? A 16-year-old girl choosing to have her back ripped apart rather than watch her little brother suffer. A grandfather submitting to torture to save his pregnant daughter. Creed would stand there with his whip. He actually named it Salvation, watching families destroy themselves trying to protect each other. And he'd smile while he did it. But then he made a fatal mistake. He picked on someone who was already broken in all the ways that mattered. Someone who had nothing left to lose. Someone named Ezra. Ezra was 26 years old, built like a brick wall, and he'd already watched this monster destroy everyone he cared about. His mother had literally worked herself to death. His friends had been tortured into shells of human beings. The breaking point came when Creed selected a 10-year-old girl named Martha for his Sunday game. This child, whose only crime was humming while she worked, was about to be destroyed by a grown man's twisted entertainment. That's when Ezra stepped forward and said 5 words that changed everything. I'll take them all. Not just the 20 lashes meant for the child. Not just the 40 meant for her grandmother. All of them. 60 lashes that would have killed most men. Creed was so excited he could barely contain himself. Finally, someone was challenging his authority. Someone was giving him permission to be even more brutal than usual. For over an hour, that leather whip tore chunks of flesh from Ezra's back. The sound echoed across the plantation like gunshots. Blood pooled at his feet. Other slaves wept watching this human being get flayed alive. But here's the thing that made Creed's blood run cold. Ezra never made a sound. Not a scream. Not a scream. Not a whimper. Not even a grunt of pain. When it was over, this man who should have been unconscious or dead turned around, looked his torturer in the eye, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Creed. That was very instructive." Can you imagine the psychological impact? The overseer expected broken sobbing. Instead, he got calm gratitude. It was like watching a lamb thank the wolf for the bite. That night changed everything. Creed became obsessed with breaking this unbreakable man. He instituted something called Ezra's Lessons. Whenever Ezra showed any defiance, Creed would torture someone else and make it clear it was Ezra's fault. Watching friends suffer because of your strength. Knowing that every moment you don't break, someone else pays the price. It's psychological torture designed by a master manipulator. But while Creed thought he was breaking Ezra's spirit, he was actually forging something far more dangerous. Every lash was teaching Ezra patience. Every humiliation was teaching him cunning. Every act of cruelty was adding fuel to a fire that would eventually consume everything. For months, Ezra endured and observed. He studied Creed's habits like a scientist studying a disease. He learned that the overseer made night rounds after drinking. He discovered the man's weaknesses, his blind spots, his vulnerabilities. Most importantly, Ezra noticed something that would prove crucial. The plantation slaughterhouse sat isolated near the creek, fully equipped with everything needed to butcher large animals, including tools sharp enough to cut through bone. The plan that formed in Ezra's mind wasn't just about killing. It was about justice. It was about making sure Creed experienced every moment of terror he had inflicted on others. Spring of 1852 brought the opportunity Ezra had been waiting for. Master Hartwell traveled to Louisville on business, leaving Creed in complete control. The overseer's power went to his head, making him reckless, careless, predictable. On a moonless night in April, Ezra set his trap. He left signs of disturbance at the slaughterhouse. An open door, scattered tools, clear evidence someone had been where they shouldn't be. When Creed came to investigate, lantern in hand, he found Ezra waiting in the darkness. "Well," Creed sneered, raising his light. "Planning to steal something, boy?" "Planning something," Ezra replied, stepping into the flickering glow. "But not what you think." What happened next lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of methodical, calculated revenge that would make hardened soldiers vomit. Ezra didn't just kill Creed. He used the overseer's own whip to tie him to a butchering post. Then he picked up a skinning knife and began to teach his tormentor what helplessness really felt like. "Please," Creed begged as Ezra tested the blade's sharpness. "I'll let you go. I'll say you escaped." "But I'm not going anywhere," Ezra replied calmly. "This is my home now." For hours, Ezra worked with the precision of a master butcher. The human body, he discovered, wasn't so different from a pig. Same joints, same muscle structure, same techniques required for efficient processing. Creed screamed until Ezra grew tired of the sound and used the man's own whip to silence him. After that, there were only wet sounds, the whisper of sharp steel through flesh, the soft thud of separated portions hitting the slaughterhouse floor. By sunrise, there was nothing left of Josiah Creed that could be recognized as human. Ezra had processed him with the same efficiency he'd use on any livestock, separating useful parts from waste. The plantation's hogs, when feeding time came, showed their usual enthusiasm for fresh meat. They weren't particular about its source, only its quality. By evening, they had consumed every trace of the man who had terrorized the plantation for years. The clothes, the boots, the whip called salvation, everything went into the slaughterhouse fire, along with oil soaked wood that burned hot enough to consume even bone fragments. By the time the flames died, there was nothing left but ash, which Ezra scattered in the creek. When Master Hartwell returned 3 days later, he found his overseer missing and his slaves strangely subdued. A search revealed nothing. The official story became that Creed had stolen the payroll and fled, a theory that gained credibility when his personal belongings were discovered missing. Ezra had buried them deep in the woods, of course, but Hartwell preferred theft explanation to more disturbing possibilities. It allowed him to believe his property remained secure, his slaves still docile. A new overseer was hired, an older man who proved strict but not sadistic. The Sunday discipline sessions ended. Life on the plantation became measurably less hellish, but something had awakened in Ezra that couldn't be put back to sleep. He'd tasted absolute power, learned he could eliminate threats, understood that freedom wasn't granted, and was taken. By autumn of 1852, he'd identified 23 slaves ready to risk everything for liberty. Not everyone. Some were too broken, too frightened, too beaten down, but enough to make a statement that would echo through history. The plan wasn't just escape. It was complete destruction of the institution that had held them. On November's new moon, when darkness provided maximum cover, they would burn Hartwell Plantation to the ground. Every building, every record, every piece of infrastructure that enabled human bondage. They wouldn't harm the family if they didn't interfere, but the plantation itself would be reduced to ash and memory. At midnight, on the appointed night, 23 separate fires began simultaneously. The November sky turned orange with reflected flames as everything that had made their bondage possible was consumed. The message was unmistakable. The slaves hadn't just escaped, they'd declared war on slavery itself. 21 of them reached Canada, successfully. 2 were lost to exposure, but the rest built new lives as free people. Ezra settled in Toronto, where he worked in a legitimate slaughterhouse, using skills learned under very different circumstances. The story of the Hartwell Rebellion spread throughout the slave states, growing larger with each telling. Some versions claimed they'd murdered the entire family. Others suggested a full-scale uprising requiring military intervention. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. They'd proven slaves could organize, plan, and execute complex operations. They'd shown the system was vulnerable to coordinated resistance. Master Hartwell never rebuilt. Insurance refused to pay, suspicious of the circumstances. He sold the land at a loss and died in poverty, broken by losing everything to people he'd considered property. Ezra lived in Toronto for 43 years, watching slavery finally crumble under its own contradictions. He married, raised children, built a life impossible under bondage, the perandage. He died in 1914 at age 89. surrounded by children and grandchildren born free. As death approached, he felt not guilt but satisfaction. He'd lived to see slavery abolished, the Confederacy defeated, a world where no child would be born in chains. The path had required blood, some belonging to those who'd blocked progress. But every drop had been necessary, every sacrifice worthwhile, every act of violence justified by the freedom it purchased. This was Ezra's story, the butcher of Kentucky who fed his overseer to hogs and burned down the plantation that held him. The truth they tried to bury, the voice they tried to silence. Sometimes justice isn't served by courts and laws. Sometimes it comes at the end of a skinning knife, wielded by hands that learned patience through suffering and precision through pain. Remember that name, Ezra. Remember what happens when you push someone beyond their breaking point. Remember that every act of cruelty carries the seeds of its own destruction, and remember that some debts can only be paid in blood. The monster thought he was creating a victim. Instead, he created something far more terrifying than he could ever be. Because when you strip away someone's humanity, you'd better pray they don't decide to show you what that really means.